1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Welcome to another season of NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden, and after a long summer, it's good to be back together here, Steele, ready to talk some hockey. And while we're on the subject of reunions, the 44-year-old Zdeno Chara has signed a one-year deal with the New York Islanders, 25 years after they drafted him in the third round, and more than 2 decades since they traded him to the Senators for Alexei Yashin. Chara had 10 points in 55 games and averaged 18 minutes of ice time for the Capitals last season. What kind of impact do you think he's going to have for the Islanders this year?
I think he's going to have a tremendous impact, and obviously he's not going to be a first or second pairing, but he brings a lot to the table that the New York Islanders are already have idealized with themselves. He brings that mental and physical toughness to the game, and that leadership experience that we've seen so often, especially when he won the Cup back with the Boston Bruins in 2011. So there's a lot of things that Zdeno Chara brings to the table. Obviously, he's not going to be getting as much ice time as we've seen in the past with him, because obviously with guys like Adam Pelech and Pulock, they're going to be the top guys on the defensive pair. But he brings a lot to the table for the New York Islanders, and I think it was a tremendous signing for the Islanders to bring Chara back to where he first started his NHL career. So for me, great signing for the New York Islanders, and for Zdeno Chara's side, great for him as well, because the New York Islanders are a top team in the NHL right now, and they're going to be making a huge push for the Stanley Cup this year.
Definitely one of the best teams in the league, and I completely agree with you. You know, that leadership, that championship pedigree, that's exactly what the Islanders need right now. They want to push this team one step further. They've been so close the last couple of seasons to getting to that finals, and I think maybe this could be one of those additions that pushes them over the edge. Now, this season, Steele, we're going to inject a bit more fantasy talk into the show, and of course, Zdeno Chara is not going to be on many fantasy rosters, so we're going to talk about some goalies instead. This next segment should help you in your upcoming drafts, and especially deep ones where you're looking at least 2 goalies here per team. Now, more so than ever, so many teams in the league favor committees in net, and there are a handful of teams right now, probably more than I can ever remember, that don't have a clear number 1 starter. Just to preface this, though, we're going to leave out teams like Buffalo and Arizona. Of course, some leagues, you're going to have to draft those goalies, but because those situations are just so bad right now and probably better to avoid altogether, we're going to stick with some other teams instead. So, Steele, let's go through some of those goaltending battles right now and pick who we think will either take that number 1 job or who you would rather draft in fantasy. First up, let's start with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Jack Campbell took the reins from Frederik Andersen last season, but the Leafs signed Peter Mrazek, who was great when he wasn't injured in Carolina last year. Who are you taking, Campbell or Mrazek?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough decision, and it's a new-looking duo in the crease for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Obviously, with Frederik Andersen being with the Leafs for so many years, and then a little switcheroo with the Carolina Hurricanes getting Peter Mrazek for Frederik Andersen. But it's definitely a tough situation, but I would have to go with Jack Campbell. And it's just a matter of fact that he deserves the crease, and he deserves to be the number 1 starter for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He took over for what a lot of people were realizing that the Leafs might not have a chance. And he played his heart out, and he played every single game at 110%. So for me, it's Jack Campbell, as well as Peter Mrazek only played 14 games last season. And like you said, there was when he did play in the games, he was absolutely lights out. He was a stellar goaltender for the Carolina Hurricanes, but he only played 14 games. So I'm not quite sure about how good his stamina is right now and how well he'll be at the beginning of the season. I just want to mention 2 of those games were in the playoffs as well. So, and he didn't fare too well in those games in the postseason. So for me, I got to go with Jack Campbell. He deserves the crease, and he should be the number 1 goaltender.
I'm going with Campbell as well. Those 11 straight wins, that awesome record, 17-3-2 in the regular season. He was even better in the playoffs, of course, with a .934 save percentage. Just because the Leafs ended up losing to Montreal, it was pretty much everybody's fault but Jack Campbell. He stood on his head in that series, and I think he deserves another shot to try to help the Leafs advance even further. So, yeah, Campbell should go a few rounds at least before Peter Mrazek. But if you're looking for a good backup and a guy that could step into a great situation if someone like Campbell is going to get injured, I think Mrazek fits that bill perfectly. Let's move over to Dallas now, who has the most crowded crease in the entire league. And me personally, I think they have 4 NHL caliber goalies. Ben Bishop is a 3-time finalist for the Vezina, but he might have trouble staying healthy after missing last season due to injury. Anton Khudobin and Jake Ottinger split the starts last year. The veteran Khudobin was 12-11-7 with a .905 save percentage, and Ottinger went 11-8 with a .911 save percentage in his rookie season. Then Dallas went ahead and added former Stanley Cup champion Braden Holtby to the mix on a 1-year deal. He, of course, had a poor statistical season in Vancouver last year. So, Steele, out of this quartet, who are you targeting?
Yeah, there's a lot of options for the Dallas Stars and for guys who are playing fantasy this year. If Ben Bishop is healthy, you have to pick him. He's the number one guy, and he's going to be the number one guy if he's healthy. But that's the problem that Ben Bishop and what we've seen with him over the last many years, actually, even when he was back with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So the fact that he's had trouble staying healthy, it's something to lean away from. So the guy I'm actually looking at is Jake Ottinger. And, you know, obviously he hasn't played as many games as Khudobin or Holtby, and he's kind of just starting his career out, but he's shown a lot of potential. And I think that he needs the time in the crease to prove that he's the number one guy. But again, there's no going wrong with guys like Braden Holtby or Anton Khudobin. I don't even blame Holtby for what happened with the Vancouver Canucks last year. It was just a total collapse for the Vancouver Canucks last season. So I have no blame towards him. But if it's not Ben Bishop, it's got to be Jake Ottinger.
I think for me, Bishop has to be the target here. Now, especially like you mentioned, if your fantasy league has an IR spot, you just cross your fingers and hope he stays healthy. If you have a short bench, no IR, maybe you don't go after a guy like Bishop, because like you said, the chances of him getting through an entire season healthy, pretty low. One thing to keep an eye on, though, with Ottinger, when I was looking at their salary cap, he is still on a 2-way deal. So if Dallas wants to put him down in the minors, let him play starters minutes down there in the AHL and keep that veteran for a backup, that could be an option for them too. But I do think he has the most promise of the 4 as well. If you're in a dynasty league, I think he was taken in the first round. Like you said, he looked great last year. He could be a really special goaltender if he gets the chance in that number 1 role. Now, let's go over to your team, Steele, and we talked about these two a little bit last season. Your Minnesota Wild boost a pretty nice duo in net. The veteran Cam Talbot went 19-8-5 with a .915 save percentage in the regular season, and he somewhat surprisingly started all 7 of the Wild's playoff games. He played really well with the .923 save percentage, but of course came up just short of winning that series, and he turned 34 years old this summer. His 25-year-old backup, Kaapo Kähkönen, had a bit of an up-and-down season. He finished pretty strong, had a 16-8 record and a .902 save percentage. Now, clearly, the Wild didn't think that Kähkönen was ready for the playoffs last season. Is he ready to push for that number 1 job this year, though?
I'm not quite sure he's ready, but he can keep trying. So I'm going with Cam Talbot on this one. But like you said, the stats there, they're pretty equal for both Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kähkönen. So you can go either way with them. I'm leaning towards Cam Talbot. He finished the season 19-8-5 with a .915 save percentage. I think because he's played so well over the last 2 seasons and he has that experience, like you said, he's 34 years old. I think he's proven that he should remain the number 1 goaltender. And like you said as well with Kähkönen, there were times during the games where it just didn't look right and he looked a little off. And it happened a few more times that I would have liked to seen. So I'm leaning towards Cam Talbot, and I think he's the number 1 guy for the Wild this year.
Yeah, I'm targeting Talbot as well. I mean, Kähkönen, like we've mentioned with a couple goalies already, if he gets that chance in net, maybe he could steal that job. But I just think looking at those last 2 seasons that you mentioned Talbot has had, he's been really good. And the faith that the coaching staff clearly has in him, I think it's his job to lose going into this season. Let's go over to Washington now for one of the tougher battles to call. 24-year-old Elia Samsonov had a nice 13-4-1 record, but he struggled statistically with a .902 save percentage in what was his first chance to grab the starter's role for a whole season. Now, the 25-year-old Vitek Vanacek went 21-10 with a 908 save percentage in his rookie season. Then he was selected by Seattle in the expansion draft and then traded back to Washington for a second-round pick in 2023. Which of these young goalies are you drafting first in your fantasy leagues?
Well, it's clear the Washington Capitals want Vanecek back, and with that being said, and what we've seen because of this trade, they might be leaning towards him being the starter, but I'm actually leaning towards Samsonov to be drafted with my first pick. Not my first pick, but as my first goalie out of these duos. Just because if we look back at the last season, he was supposed to be the starter. And if he doesn't get COVID-19 and is out for 2.5, 3 weeks, he would have remained the starter. But because at that time, Vanecek was playing so well, they kept the ball rolling. They kept playing Vanecek over Samsonov because he had to get back into shape. He had to get his stamina up. He had to play down in the AHL and kind of work his way back up there. But because it's a new season and hopefully Samsonov can remain healthy and be smart with where he's where he's going at night and what he's doing on his off time, I would lean towards Samsonov. I think he's shown a lot of potential as well as Vanecek, but Samsonov was the number one guy last year, and I think he should be the number one guy this year.
I'm going to go the other way, but it was really tight. I just think I really liked what I saw from Vanecek last season. I'm not sure if they're just going to split the starts right at the start of the season. And that's a great point, frankly, about COVID and Samsonov not maybe being able to recover so quickly, because just because you're cleared to play doesn't mean you're at 100%. So that is definitely something to watch there in Washington. Let's go over to the Florida Panthers now, and their situation is really intriguing. Sergey Bobrovsky was a little better in his second season in Florida, going 19-8-2 with a 906 save percentage. He was, of course, outplayed by Chris Driedger, but he's now in Seattle. Bobrovsky also struggled in the playoffs. Cover your eyes, folks. He went 1-2 with an 841 save percentage and an abysmal 533 goals against average in that playoff series loss. Enter former 13th overall pick Spencer Knight, maybe the best goaltending prospect in the league. He went 4-0 with a 919 save percentage last regular season, won one of his two playoff starts with a nice 933 save percentage. Now, you might think this is an easy choice for the rookie just listening to those numbers, but Bobrovsky has 5 years and $50 million left on his contract. Steele, can Florida afford to put Bobrovsky on the bench?
I think they might have to at the beginning of the season. And like you said, pretty much since his last season with the Columbus Blue Jackets, he's pretty much been useless. And ever since he touched ground in Florida, he hasn't even been there. His mind is somewhere else, and it's been shown on the ice when he plays. Spencer Knight, like you said, he was 4-0-0 with an outstanding save percentage at 919 on the season, as well as those two playoff games that he played extraordinarily well in. I would go with Spencer Knight, and it's no disrespect to Bobrovsky, but his game is just not there, and it's not matching up to where the Florida Panthers are at right now. So something has to change, and whether you bench him for the first week or 2 weeks of the season and kind of get him a little angry, get a little feisty, get something under him that he can get his fire back into his game and start playing what we've seen him play at in the middle of his career. As of right now, I'm going with Spencer Knight just because of, like you said, those stats are outstanding. He's probably the best goalie prospect in the league right now. And with Bobrovsky playing not up to his standards for the last 3 seasons, they need to go in a different direction, and that's where I'm going to with Spencer Knight.
I think it's got to be Knight as well, and this is going to be really interesting to watch. I actually think they're probably going to ease Knight in a little bit at the start of the season, maybe try to give Bobrovsky that number one job, but at the end of the day, for me, talent just wins out. And frankly, Knight is just a better goalie at this point in their careers than Bobrovsky is. As young as Knight is, I think he's ready to take that number one job. Let's go to the island now. Semyon Varlamov finished 5th in Vezina voting last season, going 19-11-4 with a 929 save percentage for New York. He wasn't quite as dominant in the playoffs, but he was still really good, helping the Isles reach the semis with a 7-7 record and a 922 save percentage. At first glance, you might think there's absolutely no chance that the 5th best goalie in Vezina voting last year gets replaced. But the 26-year-old Elia Sorokin had a really good rookie season. He went 13-6 with a .918 save percentage, and he really shone in the playoffs. He went 4-1 with a .922 save percentage. Varlamov finished last season as New York's clear #1 steal. Do you think that happens again?
Yeah, it has to be. Like you said, he was 5th in Vezina voting. I think he should have been top 3 because he was just that darn good. But as well as Elia Sorokin played for the Islanders last year in those 14 games and then a couple in the playoffs, you have to go with Varlamov. He's just been outstanding. He's been outstanding for them since he arrived there. And with Varlamov, like you said, 2.04 goals against average with a .929 save percentage. Those stats right there just speak for themselves. Speaks for itself. And Varlamov is a top goaltender in this league right now. He showed that last year. He proved that last year. And he's going to prove it again this year. Obviously, you can't go wrong with a guy like Elia Sorokin. But if you're looking for a top goalie for your fantasy league, for your fantasy team, it has to be Varlamov.
I like both these guys. I think they're both going to have good enough stats that they're definitely worth rostering and probably drafting both pretty high, but I'm with you. I think you have to take Varlamov again this season, despite being 33 years old and the fact that I think the Islanders might go closer to a 50-50 split here in the regular season. They might want to test Sorokin a little bit more. I think by the end of the year, it'll be Varlamov again, who's ramping it up heading into the playoffs. Let's finish in Columbus. Now, you might be asking why we left out Buffalo and Arizona, but we're still discussing the Blue Jackets. But prior to last season, Elvis Merzlikins and Joonas Korpisalo were both highly regarded goaltenders. Korpisalo started a small majority of their games last season. He finished with a terrible .894 save percentage, 0 shutouts, and went 9-13-7. But this is the same guy who helped Columbus sweep the Lightning in the first round in 2019-20 and boot the Leafs from the qualifying round in 2020. Elvis Merzlikins, he didn't take that step that many people predicted he was going to last year, but he did put up better numbers than Korpisalo, 8-12-5 with a .916 save percentage. So, Steele, in a deep league, will Columbus be improved enough to make either of these goalies worth drafting for you? And if so, which one are you targeting?
I don't think the Columbus Blue Jackets are good enough this year for me to draft one of those goaltenders. Obviously, if I'm stuck and I need a goaltender, I would look towards that situation. But like you said, their numbers, their stats last year, their play last year was just not up to par with the year previous to that. If I had to choose a goalie, I would be going with Merzlikins. And the reason for that is, like you said, there was an expectation for Merzlikins, and he didn't live up to it. I compare Merzlikins to a guy like Darcy Kemper or a guy like a Jack Campbell that we saw last year. He has that potential to get up to that standard, but he's not quite there yet. He steps ahead of Korpisalo right now, and that's why I would go with Merzlikins, but I would stay away from these two goalies unless I had to pick these guys.
Yeah, there's so many factors here. Losing Seth Jones, a whole new coaching staff. It's really hard to say what this team's going to look like. But I just think they've been pretty consistently good defensively in the last few years, aside from last season. So while I don't think they're going to be a good team, I do think they could be a little bit better defensively. And that's why I'd probably go with a guy like Merzlikins, take a flyer on him late in the draft if you're stuck and need a goalie. That's all for today's episode. Stay tuned for more NHL news and fantasy hockey analysis in the episodes ahead this season. On behalf of Steele Roden, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.